The topic of this lecture is offers, negotiations and contracts. There are four main goals of this presentation. We should learn about how tendering and bidding is done. Then we should consider negotiations during purchasing. We should also look at how pricing, cost calculation and cost savings are connected to the purchasing. Finally, we aim to discuss contract management. Let's take a brief look at the general purchasing process. It's important to connect the tendering, negotiations and contracting activities to the process phases. First of all, in the process phase there is a defined specification where functional, technical and other specifications are developed. Then we move to the supplier selection phase. There we should consider pre-qualification of suppliers and, for example, request for quotations are done in this phase. Then we move to the contract management and prepare contracts there and negotiate contracts also. Next phase is ordering, where we establish orders and develop order routines also. Further, we go to the expediting and these routines for expediting also will be important part in this purchasing process. Finally, we look at the evaluation phase where suppliers are evaluated and rankings done based on their performance. Next, we will highlight the role of supplier selection through bidding process. Supplier selection will be covered in more detail in other parts of the module. However, it is necessary to keep linkage to the generic principles of supplier selection also here. The process starts with identifying the purchasing requirements and getting technical specification ready. After purchasing requirements have been defined and translated in functional or technical specifications, the supply market research starts. The internal need must also be set before limiting the amount of potential suppliers. Practically, the selection of supply consists of four main steps. First, it starts with the determining of the method of subcontracting. It can be full turnkey subcontracting and partial subcontracting. It is followed by preliminary qualifications and drawing a list of those who will eventually bid. Usually those who have excellent rating score and excellent past performance are chosen. After that, companies prepare a request for quotations. Suppliers should then make a bid in a way that they can compare to each other. The activity can also called tendering process. All bids are evaluated in terms of all aspects that matter for the company. Finally, they make a decision which supplier should best selected. In some cases, two or more suppliers might be chosen. In this case, multiple sourcing might be also an option for the company. When suppliers are bidding, they should do it in a way that the bids can be compared by the buyer. The price that they offer is an important aspect. This is commonly referred to as tendering process. A tender or bid is a formal offer to supply goods or services for an agreed price. A purchasing procedure whereby potential suppliers are invited to make a firm and unequivocal offer of the price and terms on which they will supply specified goods and services, which on acceptance shall be basis of subsequent contract. The procedure for tendering involves there are at least four elements in tendering procedure. The issue of public advertisement inviting tenders, then issue of tender documentation provided to candidates. Here the procurement specification, supply qualifications and possible selection criteria are provided. Then opening of tenders on specific date, which follows. Tenders are analyzed in terms of price, rates, carriage charge, delivery, settlement terms and other information relevant to the tender. Then we move to the tender evaluation on pre-agreed basis. The various supply selection techniques can be applied here. Finally, the successful tender will be notified as well as unsuccessful ones. The procedure might differ a bit depending on type of the tender. There is first open tenders, suppliers where suppliers are invited to compete for a contract advertisement in the press or on the internet. Then we have restrict open tenders where suppliers are invited to compete for a contract, the advertising of which is restricted to appropriate technical journals or local newspapers. Then we have selective tenders, where suppliers that have been previously vetted regarding their competence and financial stating are invited to compete for a contract. Then we have serial tenders. They are used for a series of projects. Suppliers are requested for an initial scheme and a program of work will be given to the successful contractor. The rates and price for this job will be basis for the rest of the program. In this case, contractors have an incentive to maintain high performance. Finally, we have negotiated tenders. A tender is negotiated with only one supplier so that competition is eliminated. This type of contract is unusual. On the phase of supplier selection, companies should send a potential supplier requests. First of all, request for proposal, which is procurement solicitation to send potential suppliers with whom a creative relationship or partnership is being considered. It seeks to boost creativity and innovation among suppliers as a different factor. Secondly, we have a request for information. It is gathering information to compare information about prospective providers, basically suppliers, and to help decide what steps to take next before embarking on negotiation. RFPs are therefore seldom the final state, but instead are often used in conjunction with the other RFX. Thirdly, we have a request for quotation, which is best suited for standard products and services. It includes a detailed list of purchasing parameters such as the skill level, component specifications, volumes, quality levels, and etc. Another option, e-auction. It's an online auction service in which auction user or participants sell or bid for products or service via the internet. It is suited for products or services where the supply markets are competitive. Buyers has defined specifications on rather standard product or service. Major weight in supply selection is based on the price in this mode. In procurement, reverse auctions are most widely used compared to traditional forward auctions. In reverse auctions, there are one buyer and a few sellers. The price is decreasing during the auction as the auction progresses. Sellers compete to offer the lower price than their competitors, but still while meeting all the requirements set by the buyer. This kind of auction is very beneficial for purchasing for certain reason. Price reduction can be up to 20% of total savings. Finding the real price level on the market, it's easier to define it. Speed of competition, it takes only few hours in a minimum to complete the whole process. Reducing intermediate steps from the process, it's very straightforward. Finally, open and direct process and communication with journalists. So it's the open process also for the participants. Evaluation of tender is based on the criteria. Evaluation criteria include such terms as value for money, which means that price is usually non-weighted and excluded from the qualitative assessment. The tender that offers the best value for money doesn't necessarily be tender which offers the lowest price. Compliance criteria examining are they met or not, is the supply compliant or not. it is not subjective, as it is basing on the requirements and specifications on the tender. Finally, we have qualitative criteria, which should be weighted, for example, based on panel scores and then weighted accordingly by the participants. Next step is negotiation. Negotiation is a process whereby two or more parties decide what each will and give in exchange between them. The goal is to prepare and conduct negotiations with suppliers in order to establish an agreement and to write up legal contracts. Sometimes several negotiation rounds may be required before closing a final deal. Traditionally, negotiations are conducted in 5 stages. Stage 1 is the introduction and agreement of an agenda and rules of the procedure. Then stage 2, ascertain the negotiation range. It means that issues to be resolved, it can be a long-lasting stage if participants overstate their opening positions, or it might be decided very short if parties are willing to collaborate. Stage 3, agreement of common goals that must be achieved. It is the negotiation is to reach the successful outcome. It usually requires some changes from the initial negotiation rates from both sides. Stage 4 is the identification of and when possible removal of barriers that prevent attainment of agreed common goals. At this stage there will be problem solving, discussion of possible concessions. Sometimes when no progress can be made, it might be possible to refer to the issue to the higher management or change the negotiations or even abandon the negotiations. Agreement and closure is the final stage 5. Finally, participants draft the agreement reached and circulate it all parties for comments and signature. There might be different negotiation situations. Various factors might affect negotiations. Firstly, influencing strategies and skills of parties. For example, presentation of case and proposals, exercise of power, promises and threats, communication, adaptive behavior, development of trust, conflict handling modes. Secondly, we'll have an environmental influence on parties, such as macro and micro, culture, such factors, legal, political, economic, social and technological pest factors, as well as organizational climate, policies and objectives. Also strategies and structures might influence on the environment. Thirdly, situational influence on parties. It can be objective of parties in relation to perceived issues, degree of mutual dependency, conflict of interest, motivational orientation. Fourthly, behavioral predisposition of parties. For instance, self-image, attitudes, personal values, cooperativeness or competitiveness, previous interaction experience, willingness to take risk might be factors in this case. Eventually, during negotiations, parties try to reach agreement on the issue of purchasing and conditions of purchasing. An important aspect of purchasing is the negotiation of price to be paid to supplier. Factors that are connected to pricing traditionally include demand, supply, and price elasticity. Also, reference price and price structure are taken into consideration. Reference price is the price which is compared to the competitor's price. The costs are connected to all pricing methods, and that's why it's essential to address the cost approaches in the purchasing. We can look at supply and buyer power. Demand means the number of products or services that customers want and are able to buy. The most influential factor here is the price. Supply means the number of services that seller offer. Also for supply, most influential factor affecting it is the price. When demand exceeds supply, prices generally rise. When supply exceeds demand, the price generally fall. The point where demand cross supply is the equilibrium price when demand and supply are equal. Often the effect of price elasticity takes place. Nevertheless, the initial purchasing price may present only about marginal % of total cost of ownership, TCO. TCO include all the costs that the company will incur over the lifetime of the product that is purchased. It includes purchase cost, logistics cost, taxes, customs, and any other related costs related to quality, safety, stock, suppliers, development, warranty, etc. Here's the example of what can be included in TCO. It obviously starts with initial purchasing price. As the product requires installation, those costs are added as well. After that, usually the new purchase or product or service require training. Often during the usage of a product spare, also consumable costs should be added. To maintain the equipment, spare parts are needed, and also contracts with maintaining companies. Of course, as equipment might require specifically qualified personnel, labor costs are included. Energy costs and costs related to product system management, configuration, changes, integrations are also added. Finally, there might be production downtime when the equipment doesn't work for some reason, and it relates to extra losses. To look at the full picture of the purchasing cost of the material, it might be a good idea to make a cost breakdown. Cost breakdown is the systematic process of identifying the individual elements that comprise the total cost of good, service, or package. Cost breakdown can be used, for example, in the purchasing analysis and supply negotiations. Here, all of the purchasing costs related to industrial valve, 20% of them are direct costs, 51.3% are direct materials, and 28.6% are indirect costs. This analysis helps to find what are the major spendings for certain products and influence them in a certain way to decrease costs. When it comes to price arrangement, in general, buyers insist on fixed price, as it minimizes all the risk for the buyer. However, different price arrangements are in practice. There is a fixed price plus incentive fee method. This type of contract is designed to motivate supplier by means of rewards to execute the work above the agreed standard. The incentives can be related to earlier delivery or better quality performance than agreed. Then there is a cost plus contract. Cost plus contracts are used in a situation where the work cannot be specified adequately, or when a fixed price constitutes too big a risk for both supplier and buyer. In practice, this type of contract is more expensive for buyer than other type of contracts. Cost reimbursable. This type of contract is usually based on fixed hourly rates for labor and equipment. Without the bonus or penalty clauses, these contracts provide little incentives to minimize labor hours or costs. Finally, we can have agreement with price adjustment. This part of contract is used mainly for agreements with the long-term delivery or when a very specific market-sensitive materials are processed. The price is linked to an index which is based on external factors such as material costs or changes in labor costs. Then the decision for fixed price or cost reimbursable contract concerns the following factors. Comprehensiveness of the specification. Absence of specification make a fair comparison impossible. Available time. Is there enough time for a tender procedure and price negotiations? And then technical expertise. When specialized knowledge and skills are required, a cost reimbursable contract is often preferred. Finally, degree of knowledge of the industry about methods and price arrangements can affect the decision for fixed or cost reimbursable contracts. After the terms and conditions of the contract have been agreed and recorded, the order can be placed and expediting will start. There are three types of expediting. Expediting. Buyers only take action when the organization sends out signals of material shortages. It is always after the fact expediting, which is not good for the buyer. Then there is a routine status check, preventing material supply and quality problems. Few days before promised delivery, the buyer contacts the supplier to confirm delivery date. And finally, we will have advanced status check. This is for critical purchase parts. A detailed production plan will be handed over to the buyer and during the process. The buyer will carry out periodic checks. Critical may mean that the materials are with tight quality tolerance or they are coming from problematic supplier.